The moment you start explaining yourself, you've already lost. I want you to picture something. A man walks into a room full of people who've been talking about him behind his back. He knows it. They know he knows it. And here's where most men destroy themselves. They feel that pressure building in their chest, that need to defend, to clarify, to make everyone understand their side of the story. So they start talking. They start explaining why they did what they did, why they said what they said, why they are the way they are. And with every word that comes out of their mouth, they watch the respect drain from the room like water through a cracked glass. What they don't realize is that the explaining itself is the confession, not of guilt, but of weakness. Now watch a different man walk into that same room. Same situation, same whispers, same eyes on him. But this one does something that feels almost violent in its simplicity. He says nothing. He doesn't defend. He doesn't clarify. He doesn't even acknowledge that there's something to address. He just exists in that space with a kind of terrifying calm. And suddenly the dynamic shifts. Suddenly the people who were so confident in their judgment start second-guessing themselves. Suddenly they're the ones feeling the need to explain, to justify why they were talking about him, to fill the silence he refuses to fill. That's what we're going to talk about today. That silence, that refusal. That thing most men are never taught because the world needs them weak. I've watched careers destroyed not by mistakes, but by the explanations that followed them. I've watched relationships collapse not because of the original offense, but because one person couldn't stop justifying themselves into a corner. I've watched men with everything going for them hand over their power to people who didn't deserve it, all because they couldn't tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood for 5 minutes. The need to explain yourself is not a sign of good communication. It's a tell. It's the equivalent of a poker player touching their face every time they're bluffing. And once people learn to read that tell, they will use it against you for the rest of your life. Here's what nobody explains to young men. When you explain yourself, you're not clearing up a misunderstanding. You're revealing your structure. You're showing people exactly where your insecurities live, exactly what kind of pressure makes you crack, exactly how to manipulate you in the future. Every explanation is a map to your weaknesses, handed over voluntarily, often to people who were just fishing to see if you'd bite. The person asking you to explain yourself rarely wants understanding. They want submission. They want to watch you scramble. They want confirmation that they have power over your emotional state. And when you give them that explanation, you're confirming it. Think about the last time someone powerful, I mean genuinely powerful, explained themselves to you. I don't mean a politician reading a scripted apology. I don't mean a celebrity doing damage control. I mean someone you actually respected in your real life. Someone who moved through the world like they owned whatever room they walked into. When's the last time you watched someone like that get defensive, get flustered, start over-explaining their decisions to people who hadn't earned the right to question them? You probably can't remember it because it doesn't happen. The people who command real respect have internalized something that most men never learn. Your silence is worth more than their approval. Now I need you to understand why this works, because it's not about being stubborn or difficult. There's a psychological mechanism at play here that most people never see. When you explain yourself, you're accepting the frame that you owe someone an explanation. You're agreeing implicitly that they have the standing to demand one. You're positioning yourself beneath them in the interaction, and both of you feel it, even if neither of you could articulate it. The person who demands explanations is asserting dominance. The person who provides them is confirming that dominance. This happens in milliseconds, below conscious awareness, but it shapes everything that follows. The reverse is equally powerful. When you refuse to explain yourself, not aggressively, not defensively, just calmly, you're sending a signal that rewires how people perceive you. You're communicating that you don't recognize their authority to interrogate you. You're establishing that your decisions are yours, your actions are yours, and your inner life is not a public resource to be audited by whoever feels like asking. This doesn't make people angry, not the people who matter anyway. It makes them careful. It makes them respectful. It makes them wonder what else you know that they don't. Mystery is a form of power, and every time you over-explain, you're trading mystery for the cheap comfort of feeling understood. Let me give you a real scenario, because this isn't abstract philosophy. Say you're at work and you make a decision that your coworker questions. Maybe you handled a client differently than they would have. Maybe you took a day off when things were busy. Maybe you did something that wasn't wrong but wasn't what they expected. The weak play, the one most people make, is to immediately launch into justification mode. Well, the reason I did that is because, actually, if you look at it from my perspective, I know it might seem like that, but really what happened was you think you're providing context. What you're actually doing is teaching that coworker that their questioning gets results. You're training them to question you again, next time, and harder. You're establishing yourself as someone who can be put on the defensive by a simple look or a passive-aggressive comment. The power play is simpler and harder. You look at them. You let the question hang in the air for a beat. And then you either redirect, was there something you needed? Or you just don't engage with the implicit demand at all. I handled it. That's it. 2 words. No justification, no elaboration, no opening for a follow-up interrogation. The first time you do this, it will feel wrong. It will feel rude. You'll have a voice in your head screaming that you need to smooth things over, that you need to make them understand. That voice is the sound of your conditioning. That voice is why you've been giving away power your entire life without realizing you had any to give. Here's the thing about respect that nobody tells you. It's not given based on how well you explain yourself. It's given based on how little you seem to need to. Think about it. Think about the people you've respected most in your life. Were they the ones who always had a ready justification for everything? Were they the ones who responded to every critique with a well-reasoned defense? Or were they the ones who just did what they did and let the results speak? The man who over-explains is the man who isn't sure. The man who says nothing is the man who doesn't need your validation to know he's right. Whether he's actually right or not is almost irrelevant. The perception of certainty creates its own reality. Now, some of you are thinking, wait, isn't communication important? Isn't it healthy to express yourself to make sure people understand where you're coming from? And yes, in certain contexts, with certain people, communication matters. But you need to understand the difference between communication and supplication. Communication is a mutual exchange between equals who both benefit from understanding. Supplication is one person trying to earn acceptance from another by showing their work. Most of what people call explaining yourself is supplication dressed up as communication. You're not exchanging information. You're auditioning. You're not clarifying. You're seeking permission. And people can feel that even when they can't name it. The people who deserve your explanations are few. They're the people who have earned access to your inner life through years of demonstrated loyalty. They're the people whose opinions actually matter to your outcomes, not just to your comfort. They're the people who are asking because they genuinely want to understand you better, not because they want to catch you in something or establish dominance over you. Everyone else gets the wall. Not hostility, not coldness, just a boundary. A closed door where they expected an open one. That's not rudeness. That's self-possession. And self-possession is the rarest form of power in a world that trains people from childhood to be perpetually available for judgment. Let me tell you about a mistake I see constantly, especially among intelligent men. They think that being articulate is an asset in every situation. They think that because they can explain themselves well, they should. They walk into every confrontation armed with reasons, with logic, with carefully constructed arguments that prove they're in the right. And they lose anyway. They lose because the confrontation was never about logic. It was about dominance. It was about who would maintain frame and who would break it. And the moment you start presenting your case, no matter how airtight it is, you've already broken frame. You've accepted the premise that you're the one on trial. The smart play is never to accept that premise. I want you to understand something about how manipulation works, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Manipulative people, and you deal with more of them than you think, have learned that getting someone to explain themselves is the fastest way to gain power over them. They ask probing questions not because they want answers, but because they want you talking. They want you revealing. They want you invested in their opinion of you. Every time you bite, every time you launch into defense mode, you're giving them more material to work with. You're showing them your priorities, your insecurities, your need to be seen a certain way. That information is currency, and you're handing it over for free. The counter move is what I call strategic opacity. It's not lying, it's not hiding. It's simply refusing to be more transparent than the situation requires. When someone asks why you did something, you have options beyond explain and detail. You can answer a different question than the one they asked. You can acknowledge the question without answering it. You can redirect to what happens next instead of rehashing what already happened. You can simply say, I had my reasons, and let the silence do the work. None of these are aggressive. All of them preserve your position. The goal isn't to be difficult. The goal is to be impenetrable. People don't respect walls because walls are hostile. They respect walls because walls are solid. Let me give you another scenario, one that's closer to home for a lot of you. Relationships. You're with someone, and they ask you to explain a choice you made. Maybe it's why you went somewhere. Maybe it's why you said something. Maybe it's why you handled a situation the way you did. And there's this pressure, especially in romantic relationships, to over-communicate, to prove you're a good partner by making yourself fully legible at all times, to treat every request for explanation as a chance to show how open and honest you are. That pressure is a trap. Not because honesty is bad, but because performing honesty for someone who's testing you is not honesty. It's submission. The secure man in a relationship provides what's actually needed, not what's demanded. If his partner genuinely needs information to feel safe, he provides it, not because he was pressured, but because he cares about her security. If his partner is testing him, probing to see how quickly he'll jump to justify himself, he doesn't play that game. He stays calm. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't launch into a 10-minute explanation of his thought process. He says enough to be kind and honest, and then he stops. He doesn't fill the silence with more words just because the silence is uncomfortable. And here's what happens. His partner feels safer, not more anxious, because she's with someone who has a center. She's with someone who doesn't crumble when questioned. That stability is attractive in a way that over-communication never is. Here's a truth that will save you years of wasted energy. Most requests for explanation are not really requests for information. Read that again. When someone says, "Why did you do that?" or "Can you explain yourself?" they usually already have a theory. They're not curious, they're building a case. They're not seeking understanding, they're gathering ammunition. Your explanation won't change their mind because their mind was made up before they asked. What your explanation will do is provide more specifics for them to attack, more nuance for them to twist, more surface area for conflict. The winning move is often to simply not provide any of that. Let them have their theory. Their theory can't hurt you if you don't engage with it. I need to address something here because some of you are going to misapply this. Strategic silence is not the same as stonewalling. It's not about refusing to communicate with people who deserve your communication. It's not about being emotionally unavailable as a power play. It's not about treating everyone in your life like an adversary. The point is selectivity. The point is recognizing that your time, your energy, and your inner life are not public property. They're resources to be allocated based on who has earned access and what the situation actually requires. Most situations require far less explanation than you think. Most people deserve far less access than they assume. Let me tell you about someone I watched implode because he couldn't learn this lesson. Smart guy, competent, good at his job. But every time anyone questioned a decision he made, he would go into full defense mode. Not aggressive, worse. Apologetic, over-explaining, providing context nobody asked for, justifications nobody needed, background information that made him look more uncertain with every word. His bosses started to view him as unsure of himself. His colleagues learned they could rattle him with a raised eyebrow. His subordinates lost respect because they could feel his need for their approval. He wasn't demoted. He was worse. He was diminished. He shrank in people's perception until he was invisible. And the thing is, his decisions were usually right. His judgment was sound. But nobody experienced him that way because his desperate need to explain drowned out everything else. Now contrast that with another kind of person. Someone who makes a decision and owns it. Not arrogantly, not dismissively, just cleanly. When questioned, they don't get flustered. They don't launch into a monologue. They might say something simple like, "That was my call," or "I weighed the options and went with this," and then they stop. They let the results speak. If they were wrong, they adjust without drama. If they were right, they don't need to say, "I told you so," because their silence already said it. People gravitate toward this kind of presence because it feels stable. It feels like leadership. Not because this person is never wrong, but because they don't seem to need permission to be wrong. They've granted themselves the authority to make decisions without external validation, and that authority becomes self-reinforcing. There's a specific technique I want to give you for high-pressure situations, because this is where most people break. When someone is directly challenging you, when they're demanding an explanation with an edge in their voice, there's a biological urge to either fight or explain. Both are usually wrong. The fight escalates. The explanation surrenders. What works is a third thing: acknowledgement without compliance. You acknowledge that they want an explanation. You acknowledge that they're frustrated or curious or suspicious or whatever they're feeling. And then you don't give them what they want. I understand you're looking for more detail on this. I've said what I'm going to say about it. That's a complete response. It's not hostile. It's not cold. It just establishes that you're not a vending machine that dispenses explanations when someone pushes your buttons hard enough. Let me tell you what happens in your brain when you successfully resist the urge to explain yourself. There's a moment right after you stay quiet when everything in you wanted to talk, when you feel a kind of vertigo. The conversation doesn't go where you expected. The other person is still looking at you. The silence stretches, and your nervous system is screaming, "Fill this, fix this, say something." If you can survive that moment, and it only takes about 3 seconds, something shifts. The pressure starts flowing the other way. Now they're the ones in the uncomfortable position. Now they're the ones who have to decide whether to push harder or back off. And in most cases, they back off, not because you intimidated them, but because you demonstrated that your composure is not for sale. This is where I need to talk about the deeper layer, the part most videos like this won't touch. Your need to explain yourself is not really about communication. It's about a wound. Somewhere along the way, probably in childhood, you learned that your value was conditional. You learned that being misunderstood was dangerous. You learned that if you didn't make yourself legible, if you didn't constantly translate your inner life for external consumption, bad things would happen. Maybe you'd be punished. Maybe you'd be rejected. Maybe you'd just be alone with that awful feeling of not being seen. So you developed a reflex, a deep, almost involuntary drive to make yourself understood, to explain, to justify, to ensure that the world sees you the way you need to be seen. That reflex served you once. It's destroying you now. The real work is not just behavioral. It's not just about learning to say fewer words. It's about healing the part of you that believes you're only safe when you're understood. It's about building an internal foundation solid enough that other people's misperceptions don't shake you. When you no longer need everyone to see you accurately, you stop handing out maps to your interior. When you stop needing approval, you stop performing for it. The silence comes naturally then. It's not a technique you're applying. It's a reflection of who you've become. You're quiet because you're full, not because you're playing a game. Now, let me be practical here, because this is not an overnight transformation. You've been explaining yourself for years, maybe decades. That pattern is wired deep. You're not going to read one script and suddenly become the kind of person who never over-justifies. What you can do is start noticing. Start catching yourself mid-explanation and asking, is this necessary? Is this for them or is this for me? Am I communicating or am I auditioning? Just the awareness starts to create space. Just the pause, that half second before you launch into defense mode, gives you a choice you didn't have before. And choices accumulated over time are what change character. Here's a specific practice that will rewire how you show up in conversations. For the next week, anytime someone asks you to explain yourself, why you did something, what you were thinking, how you could have done whatever they think you shouldn't have done, I want you to wait 3 full seconds before responding, not as a power play, not while staring them down. Just a calm pause. In that pause, ask yourself one question. Do I actually need to explain this, or do I just want to? You'll be shocked how often the answer is want. You want them to understand. You want to resolve the tension. You want that hit of social approval that comes from a satisfied questioner. Once you see that want clearly, you can choose differently. You can say less. You can say nothing. You can give them a shrug and move on. Let me tell you what changes when you master this. First, the obvious. People treat you differently. They stop testing you because they learn there's no payoff. They start assuming competence because you're not constantly demonstrating insecurity. They respect you more not because you've done anything to earn it, but because you carry yourself like someone who deserves respect. That's not manipulation. That's accurate self-presentation. If you believe in yourself, your behavior should reflect that. If your behavior reflects constant self-doubt and need for validation, people will believe what your behavior tells them. Second, and this matters more, you feel different. The exhaustion of constantly monitoring how you're perceived, constantly adjusting your presentation to match what you think people want, that fades. You get to just be. You get to exist without performing. That's freedom most people never taste. I want to address something directly because I know it's in some of your minds. This isn't about being dishonest. This isn't about hiding who you are or being inauthentic. It's the opposite. When you stop explaining yourself, you're not concealing your true self. You're refusing to dilute it. Every explanation is a translation, and every translation loses something. The version of you that gets communicated through a defensive explanation is not you. It's a performed approximation of you designed to be acceptable to whoever's listening. The real you is the one who makes choices and lives with them. The real you is underneath all the justifications. By explaining less, you're actually being more authentic, not less. You're letting your actions speak for themselves instead of editorializing them into acceptability. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes when you internalize this fully. It's the freedom of not needing to be right in everyone's eyes. Most people carry this invisible burden, this constant accounting of how they're perceived, this internal PR department that's always strategizing about reputation management. When you stop explaining yourself, you put that department out of business. You accept that some people will misunderstand you. Some people will think badly of you. Some people will construct entire narratives about who you are and what you've done that bear no resemblance to reality. And you're fine with that. Not because you don't care about truth, but because you understand that you're not responsible for managing other people's perceptions. You're responsible for your actions. Your actions are clear. Their interpretations are their business. Let me give you the final frame, the one that ties all of this together. Every time you explain yourself when you don't have to, you're paying a tax, a respect tax, a power tax, a self-possession tax. The tax goes to whoever demanded the explanation or to the social pressure that made you feel like you had to give one. And here's the thing about taxes. Small ones seem harmless, but they compound. Every explanation you give makes the next one easier to demand. Every defense you offer trains people that you can be put on trial. Over months and years, you pay so much of this tax that there's nothing left. You've explained yourself into a position of permanent subordination, always justifying, always clarifying, always showing your work to an audience that never really cared. Stop paying the tax. Not all at once, not aggressively, not in a way that creates unnecessary conflict. Just start noticing every time you're about to pay it, and ask yourself if this is a bill you actually owe. Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, your silence is worth more than any explanation you could offer. Most of the time, the right answer is no answer at all. The people who matter will understand you through your actions. The people who don't matter don't deserve the map to your mind. The respect you're looking for was never going to come from being understood. It was only ever going to come from being solid. Become solid and stop explaining what you're made of. They'll figure it out by watching you stand,